All right. Well, thanks everybody for attending and welcome. Just as a reminder, if you'd place yourself on mute. So what we're going to do today is we're going to go through an overview of the proposed 2021 St. Andrews current fund budget. We'll go through, we'll review what the results were for 2020. We'll look at our proposed balanced budget for 2021. We'll go into some level of detail about what we spend our money on or what we're proposing to spend our money on this year. And then I'll talk about the status of our PPP loans or our government assistance loans that we got last year and perhaps we'll get again this year. So that's how we'll spend our time over the next half hour, 40 minutes or so. Like I said, this is meant to be definitely an interactive session. I'm happy to take any questions that anybody has on this topic. But before I get into the numbers, I just want to say a few thank yous to folks who've worked really hard on this activity, setting the budget, and then just reviewing the general finances of the church. First, like to thank Russ, our accounting assistant. We are extremely blessed to have Russ on our staff. He's put on a lot of time developing, recommending, and just organizing all the numbers that we need for the 2021 budget. So I appreciate Russ and everything he does. Also want a big thank you to Joni, who's been our treasurer for the last number of years, 3 years or so. Put in a ton of work on all kinds of things, but especially securing our PPP paycheck protection loan that we got last year. So big thank you to Joni for all of her work. And then the finance committee in general, just a lot of work this last year in overseeing the finances of the church, making sure that we have a really firm financial foundation during a really challenging time. Recommending some smart decisions to the executive committee and council. So really appreciate the work of the finance committee as well. So would be remiss if I didn't start with those thank yous. All right, so let's get into the numbers here, and we'll look at some things. I tried to put both pictures and numbers in for people who are table driven and picture driven as well. So. Hey, this is what happened in 2020. Now, 2020 for all nonprofits and businesses alike was a very challenging year, and St. Andrews was certainly not immune to that challenge. We had actual income last year of $760,000 and actual expenses of $790,000. That was, both of those numbers were below budget by a pretty good amount. We'd had budgeted around $895,000 of income and $895,000 of expenses in 2020. Income is a relatively easy story. People just gave less than what we expected for the most part, although we also lacked building use fees that represent a decent portion of our income as well. So those two things ended up being less than expected. One of the big ways that we generate income is during the Christmas season. People tend to give a decent size amount. Those tend to be as a result of in-person services, and obviously we didn't have that this year, so that depressed income a bit. On the expense side, I guess we were fortunate to also underrun our expense budget by over $100,000. A couple of big reasons for that. One is just generally we weren't a church, so that drove down certain expenses on both programs and what we spent on the property. We also had more budget last year for the youth and family ministries position than we ended up using. Doug started a little later than what we'd planned in the budget. And then we had other staff expenses that were just a little bit lower than planned for various reasons. So that's the main reasons why we underran expenses. Since we did spend more than we brought in, at least from a current fund basis, we did have to make a year-end adjustment to take $30,000 out of our reserve fund that we'd set up a number of years ago to help stabilize and firm up our financial foundation. We still have over $100,000 in our reserve funds, so it's still hanging in there. This is why we set up a reserve fund for unusual years like this. But we definitely still did exceed expenses by income. All right. Any questions about 2020 before I move on to 2021? And that's exactly right, that we have not included that as income because we haven't officially gotten it forgiven, although we're about 95% sure at this point that it will be forgiven. And I'll address PPP in detail at the end of the presentation. Any other 2020 questions? Okay. All right, so this is what we are looking at a high level for 2021. We're looking at an expected income of $838,000 and proposed expenses of $838,000. So we're going to propose a balanced budget here. The budgeting process this year was, I think, by far the most challenging we've had over the last 15 years, just because of uncertainty around what we think our income is going to be due to the situation around the pandemic. And then we had a lot of requests, a lot of needs in the proposed expenses that we tried our best to fulfill, to balance, given the income situation. So you'll notice that we are projecting a decent size increase of income over 2020. That's mainly due to us hopefully getting back to in-person services, maybe in the second half of the year, and then also generating some building use fees again in the second half of the year as the pandemic situation settles down. And frankly, it's just going to depend on our members contributing and living up to the commitments that we made in the contributions that were promised to give this year. If we do that, then we'll meet that income budget without too much difficulty. On the expense side, like I said, it was really difficult this year. We had, when we built up our budget from a bottoms-up perspective, we had about $950,000 of requests. We had to find a way to, in order to present a balanced budget, to whittle that down to $838. We did that with some, fairly difficult decisions about where we spend our money. As a philosophy, we decided that we would take care of the staff first, and make sure that we had a fully staffed church, and we're able to provide for the members of our church with that staff and staff community. And we needed to make sure that we at least had the minimum requirements met for taking care of our building and property going forward. That said, we still have plenty of money to run our programs and take care of important things like music and youth and especially mission outreach giving. And we'll go through that in detail here in a moment. So it was a hard balance, but I think we came to a really fair balance at the end of the day. So we are going to get into some more detail here in a moment, but anybody have any questions about just the raw numbers of 838,000? Yeah, great question. What we'll probably do with the PPP loan, let's assume that we get the PPP loan forgiven. We'll probably put that PPP loan amount into the reserve account at that point. So if we do fall short of our income projection this year, we can perhaps use some of that amount to make it up, or we'll just make it so it's a part of our continued firm financial foundation going forward. Building use fees are really made up of two things. One is the cell phone tower that's on our property makes up about half of the building use fees. And fortunately, that's been pandemic proof. We've gotten just as much income from the cell phone tower as we always do. And then the second part of building use fees is groups that come in and request to use our building that actually pay us for it. There are some groups that come in and we just grant them use of it for charitable purposes. Other groups come in that want to use our facility for whatever reason, weddings. I can't remember the detail of the groups that use it, that pay a fee, make up the other half. And it's about $25,000 or so a year of income, maybe 30,000 that we expect from building use fees. But obviously, we didn't get last year. We only got about half of that. We historically have not proactively advertised, our building for use, if that's what the question is aiming at. It's certainly a possibility that we could consider, but it hasn't been our historical practice. All right, so just a graphic of where we spend our money in the current fund budget. Like the banner says at the bottom there, we spend 84% of the money on our staff and our building. So that is where the majority of our budget has gone. That percentage has increased over the last few years. It was 82% last year. It was about 80% the year before. So as we've had a slight decline in giving over the last 3 years, the percentage of income that we're spending on staff and building, which is more or less our fixed expenses, has increased. You can see where we spend the other portions of our money. Mission and outreach being the next largest expense item, followed by programs, which include both music and youth and just general church programs that we put on. And then the other expense categories being relatively small, such as supplies, communications, and other. Yep, we typically try to budget about 10% of our total income for mission and outreach. Like I said, this year we had to make some hard decisions across because our income was relatively low. We still managed to be close to 10%. We're at 9.2% for mission and outreach. And that's just out of the current fund. If you count all the other special givings, though, that we do, Equal Exchange Coffee, other things to Maasai Girls School, things that we've done in the past for Bahar, we do exceed that 10% threshold, but hopefully in future years we get our income a little bit more stabilized post-pandemic, we can get back up and over that 10% threshold. Yeah, a little bit more detail on where on the money, and this is basic. This aligns exactly to that previous chart. You can see where we spend the 838,000. It's 437,000 and 150,000 on salaries and wages for the staff, 117,000 for property, and 77,000 for mission and outreach. And those top four items there, make up 92% or so of the budget going into this year. And then we have other items where we spend money on programs, on just supplies for the church. We have a quote other category where we lump a whole bunch of expenses in there, just running the church type expenses, bank charges, pastoral resources, things that we do for meetings, honoraria, that type of thing. And then we have about a $4,000 budget each year for communications, mailings, and stuff like that. So any questions on either one of those two pages? Sure, and there's two or three things there. The biggest one is that when we accept giving by credit card, or we have other credit card type items, we pay a credit card fee just like any business that takes credit cards does.
Yeah.
And then there's a couple of other bank fees where we pay some bills via transfers and stuff like that, where we pay some bank fees. It's not a significant amount. It's not the majority of that 10,000. I can't remember off the top of my head what it is, but. Sure. Let's see. I'm not sure that off the top of my head I can name every paid staff member, but in general, we're talking about Pastor, we're talking about Dr. Will, we're talking about the Youth and Family Ministries Director, or the core staff there. We also have the office staff, so Susan and Mary, as an example, are on staff. I am forgetting other people, I think, who are on paid staff as well. But that's the majority of it.
And Sherry Grindeland.
Sherry, yeah.
Sherry.
Yeah.
And Kurt.
And Kurt, yes.
Do not forget Kurt, please.
That is true. We do not have any debt at this moment. The PPP loan, I guess, is technically debt, but we haven't classified it as debt. We haven't classified it as income yet on our balance sheet, just until we get the final decision on loan forgiveness. But our last time we actually carried debt was when we had debt on the building, and that got paid off in 2016-ish timeframe. So no debt service. So there's two reasons for that. One is we're going to have Doug on full-time staff, where we only had him for half-time last year. So that was part of the health insurance increase. And then the second part was just general health insurance costs are rising over the course of time. So it's approximately half one reason, half the other reason. Yeah, health benefits. So that's basically the health insurance coverage that we provide for the staff.
Brady, I can jump in on that also. Sure. And let you know. The health benefits are some enhancements that were voted in recommended by Human Resources and voted in by the council to have. It's sort of like a savings account for the staff. It had been narrowly defined as dental benefits, and then they expanded the reach of how those benefits could be utilized by the employees. And so it's kind of like a health savings account, and they have their own choices on how to spend that money. I think it was widely viewed as a really nice enhancement to helping our staff have benefits that weren't covered under our health insurance. Yes, that is a pension, and with the 401k, with the nonprofit status, people are participating in different types of ones. So you wouldn't call it a 401k because I forget the designation of it, but that's exactly what it is. And the church will match employee donations based on their length of service.
Well, so I can speak to that. Just because of the unprecedented strains on the budget this year, we decided that we would not hire our landscaping service that we normally have. So we just needed to find places to cut, and I thought that was one that we could. And I'll put in a plug, there will be 2 work parties this year, one in the spring and one in the fall, and we would love to have y'all out there.
That's just some leftover expenses for that we have to pay for Pastor Laura's relocation. No, so AV actually stands for audio visual. So that is partially our camera system and our video system, or our audio system and visual system for the church. Yeah, and I can help with that perhaps, and maybe Kirk can step in to, as we were looking through the budget, we're trying to find ways to, we're trying to find every possible way that we could reduce budget spending as much as possible. And Kurt's done an awesome job of finding ways to spend less money on our building over the course of time, but still maintain that building really well. And then I'll tell you, the budgeting process is a little bit imprecise in how we go about it as well. We just try to make sure that we have enough money in the budget to maintain the property, maintain staff, maintain everything that we need to do. So you can see some ups and downs in individual line items, but over the course of time, they tend to balance themselves out. It's possible that we might get into the building earlier than we think and use more water and electricity than we think. We might overrun that budget item by $500 or $1,000. It's very likely that we'll underrun some other budget line item by that same amount and it'll balance itself out. But I don't know, Kurt, any other comments on that?
Well, also specifically regarding the electricity, we just had to make some assumptions. And this year, I forecast that January through June will be like we are now with much lower usage. And then July through December, we'll be back to where we were in 2019. In regards to actuals for 2020, we had the CFH shelter for 4 months. And that is just, it was a big draw on utilities. So that kind of artificially made 2020 higher than it would have otherwise been.
We aren't specifically required to give anything, but we are part of the larger church. And so in the same way that we give our offerings to St. Andrews, we also then give to organizations outside of us and organizations that we partner with. And the Synod is one of those partners. And the money we give to the Synod for benevolence doesn't stay in the Synod office. It actually goes, they take then a percentage of that and send it on to churchwide, where it helps support global missions, that helps support Lutheran disaster response, Lutheran world relief, and those types of things. When I spoke with Joni, and Joni, jump in here if I mess this up, before the congregation voted to call me as pastor, before I accepted, when I was here meeting and greeting everybody, one of the things I asked about was that amount, because it looked so small in comparison to the budget. And the way it was explained to me is that it is small comparative to the budget, but it's so that we can continue to, it allows us to support the Synod and support all of the other organizations that we do. And so it is a flat amount. And it's actually, when I was looking back at numbers from previous years, it's actually, the 25,000 was actually lower than it had been. And this year it's even lower still because of our current budget situation. But as far as what we're required to give, we're not required to give anything. But the Synod depends on that, not only for their expenses, but also so that because churchwide depends on our expenses too. And that's how we end up supporting churchwide.
We've been supporting the UW campus ministry pretty regularly, particularly while Elizabeth Rawlings was pastor there. In 2020, they closed that down at the University of Washington. Pastor Rawlings had to find another job, and they discontinued supporting that. They may pick that up again, but we decided not to just put our money into general campus ministry, but focus on things that made sense for our church to be supporting right now. So that may appear in the budget again in the future, but right now they don't have a Lutheran campus ministry at the University of Washington. And so that's why it's not on the budget for this year.
Can I hop in here real quick? The campus ministry at UW has started up again. It just started this past fall, and I actually have a conversation with the current campus pastor set up for this coming Wednesday. And so I may have more information on this after that meeting with her.
Sure. So the pledges are cover about 560,000 of the 836. And traditionally we've had a significant amount of non-pledged income over the course of time. As we looked at potential income, as we've looked at the energy of coming back into the church, and as we looked at the potentials that we've got going around in some committees, we decided to stretch the budget up to 838 from an income perspective. We realized that that's a stretch. It's backed up by the potential for the PPP loan forgiveness, both the 2020 loan and a potential 2021 loan. So we were comfortable making that stretch up to 838, but it is a stretch. It's something that we're going to monitor real carefully over the course of this year. We've done a number of things over the course of time when we saw giving being at different levels. If you remember right, I think in 2018, might have been 17, I don't remember. At the middle of the year or so, we had a real income shortfall, and we were getting quite nervous about the situation the financial situation of the church. And so we had a letter sent out from Pastor Jim at the time and from the council president, just explaining what the situation was at the church. And what we've seen, I've been on the finance committee for 13 years, I think. What we've seen time and time again is that people give to need. And when we can describe a specific need that the church has and describe why it's important, people give. And so if we get ourselves into a situation this year where we have a significant shortfall that we see that we're projecting, we'll describe that need to the congregation, and I'm pretty darn confident that the congregation would respond to the need. Yeah, sure. So the philosophy here was about protecting our staff. So as we went into this last year, we applied for the PPP loan in we'll say the late spring timeframe, and that was a time of pretty deep uncertainty about what was going to happen next. And our number one priority at that point was to make sure that we protected our staff and made sure that they were able to continue working full time and being able to serve not only our congregation but also the community at large that we serve. So if we're talking about moral obligation, I felt a moral obligation as well as the finance committee and others to make sure that we protected the members of our staff who do such a great job for us and for the community. So that was our moral obligation answer to that question. Yeah, maybe we'll go into PPP discussion at this point. So like I said at the beginning, we did apply for and receive a Paycheck Protection Program loan. We qualified for under the terms last year, received that loan. And even just this week, I've been working with our loan officer on the forgiveness part. Like I said, we're 95%, maybe 99% positive that we're going to qualify for forgiveness of that loan. I just need to make the paperwork happen at this point. Right now for 2021, we're reviewing our qualifications for the Paycheck Protection Program. I'm just getting into that now. I'm working with the same loan officer for it. From what I see right at the moment, I'm not certain we're going to qualify for a 2021 loan based on the terms that were laid out by the congressional bill. I don't know that for sure yet. I've still got more research and work to do with our loan officer, but I'm more. I think it's more likely than not that we will not qualify for an additional loan this year. All right. Well, that's actually the end of my formal comments here. So we've had a lot of questions so far, but happy to take any other questions that you have.
Brady?
Yeah.
Before we close, on behalf of the council and I think the entire congregation, I'd like to thank you for the presentation, for leading the discussion, and also for assuming the treasurer responsibilities. As you mentioned earlier, this year with the pandemic effects has made that budgeting process a real challenge. And I know that there's been a lot of people that has been involved in helping you with this. But again, I'd like to thank you. I'd like to thank the entire Finance Committee. I'd like to thank our staff. And I'd like to thank the committee chairs who have also been a part of this. So thank you all for all this. And we know this has been a tough time to do this. Let me take that one, Brady, if you don't mind.
Yep.
So what we normally do is in our annual meeting that is typically conducted at the end of January, is the budget is brought to the congregation who are present at that meeting, and they vote on adopting that budget. That's one of three things that occurs according to the Constitution in that meeting.
Right.
Because we cannot have in-person meetings this year. The council has voted not to have an annual meeting until we can safely have an in-person meeting. So in place of that, what will happen is that the council at their next meeting will be asked to consider on behalf of the congregation as their representatives to consider and vote on the budget that is being presented and recommended by Brady, excuse me, and the Finance Committee. And then when we are able to have a congregational meeting, it will be brought to the congregation, whatever time that happens to be, for confirmation and adoption of that budget.
And we're going to keep a close watch on everything, as we always do, from a finance perspective, and report out in our various communication channels that we always do going forward. So thanks everyone for your participation, and we'll talk to everybody later.